If you're looking for clear, pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
Well, I am so excited to welcome a special guest to the Equipped for Life podcast today. In fact, I have been looking forward to recording this episode for months now. And we are bringing on comedian Josh Harris to talk about humor and dialogue. It's a subject that we've talked about before on this podcast. But before we get into it, let me just introduce my guest. Exploding onto the comedy scene, young Atlanta comedian Josh Harris has experienced an impressive rise over the last few years. Hailed by Creative Loafing magazine for combining frat boy silliness with a trap star mentality, his high-energy performances and one-of-a-kind material made him a semi-finalist on Bill Bellamy's Who's Got Jokes. In 2009, NBC flew him to LA to compete in the finals of the nationwide talent search Stand Up for Diversity, which showcased the country's 10 freshest comedians at the Comedy Store. In 2012, he performed a nationally televised comedy set for Bounce TV's Off the Chain, hosted by Rodney Perry from The Monique Show. In 2017, he performed a nationally televised comedy set on Trinity Broadcasting Network. In 2018, he hit viral video success, garnering over 10 million views on his hilarious sketches. Most recently, Carnival Cruise Ships offered Josh a 6-month entertainment contract to bring his hilarious comedy on board. He's written for Cartoon Network Online, starred in a television pilot for History Channel, and in 2015 released his debut musical comedy album, I'm Here, You're Welcome. The album hit number 3 on the iTunes comedy charts. Most recently, Josh filmed his testimony for the popular EWTN show Catholics Come Home. Josh gives all the credit to his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the source of his peace, joy, and many blessings. Josh Harris, welcome to the Equipped for Life podcast. It is so good to have you on.
I'm here, you're welcome. No, I'm just kidding.
I get that reference. It's good. I mean, people really should. I mean, I'll tell you, you were Jacob's friend first. Jacob kind of reaches out to me and says, hey, there's this guy that's been doing sidewalk counseling, and we should talk about your sidewalk counseling in a second. But he's like, there's a guy that's been doing busted sidewalk counseling in Atlanta, and he's a comedian. And he's going to teach me about comedy and like all this stuff. And I was like, okay. And I'm just going to admit, I discriminate a little bit in my head against Christian comedians or people who make movies. It's because I've heard a lot of bad Christian comedy. Sure. And I am really, really into comedy. Like, I listen to comedy all the time. I'm a hardcore fan. I love all that stuff. And I was just like, okay, like, I just didn't take it that seriously. I totally discriminated against you. And then finally, as we got to thinking about doing this episode, I went and listened to one of your albums on Spotify, and it was like, this guy is really funny. He's really good. Like, I really mean it. It's really good to have you on, and you do really understand. So if anyone else listening kind of has that bias that I had, like, you should listen. It's really, really good stuff. There's a lot of different kind of cool influences that I feel like I hear in your work, and it's just really, really good. And yet, you're also really into sidewalk counseling. So before we jump into humor, tell us a little bit about the story. I don't even think I know fully the story of like how you and Jacob hooked up and how you ended up doing a lot of sidewalk counseling in Atlanta, because you guys have seen a lot of really cool things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jacob is he's an awesome guy. He's really gone above and beyond in terms of helping me just hone my message and my approach. I think I went to a clinic one day. It's interesting. I moved around the corner from a abortion clinic, and I wasn't very pro-life or anything at the moment. I mean, I believed abortion was wrong, but I was driving by the clinic one day, and there was this voice inside my heart, in my stomach. I just heard that said, like, you need to get out and pray with those people. And immediately I thought, we've got a bad connection, God. That cannot be you. I'm just going to keep cruising. But I feel like the farther I drove away, the more sick I got at the pit of my stomach. So I parked my car. I ran out. I found some of those people on the sidewalk, and I said, I don't have much time, but I'm going to say an Our Father with you. I said an Our Father. I sprinted back to my car, peeled off, But, it eventually I would go. That was, it's like, if you take one step to God, he takes 3 more towards you, I believe. So the next time I went out, I was there a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And eventually was getting some training and got to shadow Jacob, who, I see this guy who looks like he's looks like he's straight off a casting call for Walker, Texas Ranger or something. I mean, what This guy's got the denim starter kit from top to bottom. He's, got the ear pod in. He just looks like he commands this thing. And I was really respected him. I mean, right away, is very easy to talk to, had a very, just a great leadership quality to him. So I shadowed him, and I would say so I was performing a lot on cruise ships, actually. I was doing stand-up comedy on cruise ships. I had like a headlining contract with I'd say probably the biggest cruise liner in the world, I would think. I was doing stand-up on those ships, and obviously the world went bananas sandwich, and not judging or anything. I think, there was a good call on the ships. They pressed pause.
Yeah.
And so I'm off, and I've got a lot more free time on my hands. And so I see Jacob in front of this clinic one day. I mean, he'd been coming on Fridays to the clinic we had been going to. And I remember just asking him if there was a 40 days for life out here, would it do more? Would more lives be saved? And he said, oh, absolutely. Hands down. I mean, he was like so adamant about having a consistent prayerful presence. So right away, I called a friend of mine, or messaged her, and I said, can we do a 40 days for life in the summer? And she said, no, but we can do a summer for life. So we sort of Jimmy rigged our own prayerful presence, and
Nice.
It has been outstanding. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I wouldn't be surprised if there have been 20 saves or 20 people since, June that have chosen life, left the clinic. I mean, probably a lot more that have left the clinic. I think we've had 3 or 4 sets of twins leave that place. I mean, it's been incredible. And,
That's amazing.
Jacob has really been like on our quote board of directors. He's been amazing in terms of the advice he's given me. And when I've even been in, I remember one time when I got farther than I've ever gotten in a sidewalk dialogue, the first time this had ever happened. And I didn't know what to do. So I called Jacob. I was like, I've never gotten this far. What do I do next? and he coached me through it. I mean, he's incredible. So he's really been phenomenal for our ministry, and he's been great. We love him.
I'm excited for that. Jacob's had this kind of interesting journey behind the scenes at ERI, where he started as kind of like our logistics guy and the guy that talks to college students a lot and kind of sets up outreaches. And then we kind of realized that's not what he's best at. So we should have him do other things. And then the Sidewalk counseling course happened. And once the course was out, which has been out for about a year now, I think, it just seemed obvious to me that hey, the more time that I can just have Jacob do that is what he is super, super good at.
Yeah,
and that has meant for him since the course, working one-on-one with a lot of people like you. And I know there's a lot of other people around the country where it's just now that's kind of what he kind of gets paid to do. It's just, it seems like a lot of people just kind of, even if they watch the course, there's still these problems or things that they need to work through, and having someone with that experience, it's just been really cool to say, hey, take as much time as you want, work with those people. And so I'm just so glad that's been helpful for you. And it is so encouraging for me to hear about the lives saved there, because I don't know what would have happened if Jacob hadn't been working on Sidewalk counseling so long. And I'm just excited that this course has been helping people in Jacob's help. It's just super cool. Okay. So that's a really cool way to figure out how did a stand-up comedian become a sidewalk counselor? So now that makes sense. The cruise ship shut down. So that makes sense.
Sure.
So let me pivot you over to humor. So humor is really important to us at ERI. We recently finished our official list of core values, and a lot of them are the same things that you see on a lot of lists of core values. Everyone is innovative, and everyone is, all these different things. But we also added humor as one of our core values, and we mean that both at an internal level and an external level. So on an internal level, what we mean by that is we're going to really try to not take ourselves too seriously, because philosophers who take themselves too seriously are the worst people to hang out with. And so, so it's just let's laugh at each other and kind of have fun, and in a sense of hopefully being able to extend the time that we do this, because this work is really hard, and being able to have fun with each other is a way of kind of okay, let's not be super unhealthy. At an external level, I care about my speeches being funny and trying to write jokes and lines for talks, because I speak to young audiences a lot, and I just don't want it to be in this really dreary, Holocaust talk for 45 minutes. And it's oh my gosh, I want them to be engaged and into it. So we care a lot about that. We've talked about using humor in dialogue before on this podcast. but it's been a long time. And so I kind of want to go back into a little bit of that. Like, why is it even useful to, if you're dialoguing with a pro-choice person about abortion, for there to be humor? Because I imagine that topic for a lot of pro-lifers, they would hear me even say that and be like, dude, what are you talking about? This seems so weird. It seems like you're putting these two very different things and you're like that are very juxtaposed and putting them together. It seems maybe even inappropriate to them that we would try to find opportunities for humor in these conversations. So as a master humorist, help people understand, what is your take on humor in the context of pro-life work?
Well, a mentor of mine a while back said something pretty important, and though he wasn't referring to humor, I think it can be translated as sometimes you've got to earn the right to be heard, right? And so that. If you can, I guess, help people let their guard down just a touch, right? Because a lot of times people come up in these pro-life conversations and they're expecting a fight. Yeah. Right. And so if you can make them smile, I mean, I don't know what is more antithetical than a combative state than actually laughing. I mean, you never see, I mean, there's no pictures of people charging into the Civil War with smiles on their face, like someone, I think similarly, I mean, it is just so contrary to a combative spirit. So for me, I've found it has bought me time with people in very high stakes situations where otherwise they might not listen. And it, again, in comedy, you really want to try to get them laughing, I think, within the first minute. I mean, more like 30 seconds, but if you can just hit it right away. So like an example might be, we do this if someone who is leaving an abortion clinic has the courage to roll down their window and talk to me. And maybe they're like, their foot's already on the gas. Right. You know what I mean? Like they're not, but I don't know, maybe they're just desperate enough to just lend an ear for 5 seconds. Who knows what inspires them? And I might just go say, oh my gosh, it's so nice to see you. You are so beautiful. What's your name? And they might say like, Tiffany. I'm like, oh, wow, that's actually my father's name. They're like, wait, what? I'm like, no, I'm just kidding. And like, I've seen it like time and time again, like it'll just like crack them, and all of a sudden it's bought me another 2 minutes of time.
Wow.
Right.
It's so unexpected. It is so the opposite of what they're expecting or what they've been led to think that someone like you is going to say. I mean, being nice on its own is pretty unexpected, but being nice and having like this really kind of funny line right in the beginning, that makes sense to me that they would be like, okay, I'm super curious what is going on.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too is if you can lace any humor with a compliment, go for it. We never want to punch down in these kinds of situations. I'm realizing always punch up, and in the sense that, these people are already potentially having the worst day of their lives. Right. So I've heard there was an old acting teacher of mine. He said something I never forgot. And I try to use it in my classes and just in dialogues. He would say, okay, after you did your monologue, 2 compliments and 1 constructive criticism. And I feel like that's a great way. If you can lay down like 2, maybe, now I'm not saying this is a hard, fast rule, but like 2 good things and then get to some truth, right? Yeah. Like that's also pretty cool. And pay attention to the organics of the environment, right? Like what is going on in this moment? I remember one time I was talking to a gentleman and I don't even know why. I must have come from like a mass service or something potentially, but I was out on the sidewalk in like khakis and like a pink sweater. I mean, it was like the Carlton Bank starter kit or something.
From Easter service.
Yeah, I don't know why I was very like country club at that for whatever. I don't know why, but I was. And so I said, hey man, I'd love to hear your story. And this guy like stepped out of the car and he said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, but like, you don't want to hear my story. I'm from the streets. And I looked at myself and was like, can't you tell? Me too. And like, I'm literally decked out in, exactly what you would expect someone in a country club to be sporting. So, I mean, and then in terms of punching up, I've done just some of this stuff. I think you also have to know how to say it with confidence. If you say some of this stuff sheepishly, it's not going to work. I mean, delivery is half the battle, but there was a guy whose sister was in there and he showed up and I just, he rolled down his window and he was having a tough day. And I would just say like, oh man, like, hey, how are you doing? I know it's a tough day. And I just stopped like, man, you were in great shape, bro. Can we trade biceps? Just something like they just wasn't expecting. And then all of a sudden we got into a really deep conversation and, he's letting me pray with him and all this stuff. But like, I just felt like the icebreaker gave me a little bit more credibility, right? Wow. Because he had a smile on his face. So I feel like, sometimes you can lace it with a compliment. That also helps. But, having something that you can maybe like an icebreaker, a quote opening line. I mean, you don't want it to sound stock and cheesy, but like if it can feel organic and segue into, a compassionate dialogue, I think that is very helpful.
I mean, and that's part of delivery. I mean, I've got lines that that are funny in speeches that I've used, dozens and dozens and dozens of times. But it's like the key is to make it seem like it's not a thing that I've said dozens and dozens of times. So I'm almost like a thing that just like came to my head in that moment. Well, I want to go back. One of the things that I love about what you did, where you're wearing like the Easter clothes, is you took a thing that was like this was kind of like a mistake a little bit. Like you were wearing the wrong clothes. We even talk about this in the course. Like, don't be wearing like nice like bracelets or a super nice watch, like kind of like dress down a little bit because you don't want to give that feeling. And so it's like he literally said like basically the why was just like he like had this instinct of we're too different guy. And the fact that you were able to use humor to diffuse that and sort of like take that thing that like normally would have been a mistake and almost use it to your advantage and start it with this joke and kind of lighten the mood and compliment, like that's masterful. That is really, really impressive. So a quick question about the compliment thing. When you talked about the idea of like 2 compliments and then constructive criticism, kind of applying that to dialogue, like the thing that first kind of brought to my mind as far as the way that I apply that, but I think it's a little bit different. So you can kind of compare and contrast a little bit. Like I think, like I'm thinking of like common ground. I'm like, all right, like here's like 2 like really great things that you just said. I totally agree with this thing that you said, and then there's this other really good point that you made. Here's like the one thing that I would disagree about, and then you kind of go. So that feels kind of like that model, which is something that we do. But I mean, they're kind of implied compliments. I'm kind of saying like, here's something really smart that you said, but you're sometimes like you're going beyond that. You're complimenting like their physical features or things like that.
Sure, absolutely. And I will, I think that whatever I can do to win a conversation or just earn one, right? Yeah. And so I'm trying to think of this one guy. I mean, like a guy was walking in there one day and he had on a tracksuit. And honestly, I will preface it like if I'm not screaming one-liners at people as they are approaching the abortion clinic, because that's I mean, I try to make it hopefully to where at least the proximity can feel like it's somewhat personal. Now, I mean, I have said this before. If a guy walks the girl to the clinic and they haven't been responsive to us reaching out, he starts walking back down with the purse in his hand. I'm like, bro, you are way too tough to hold that purse. You know what I mean? Like, you look way too tough. Like, or, if I want to be more gentle and more of a punch up and a compliment, it could be something like, man, let me tell you, it takes a beautiful man to make a guy that tough hold a purse. It takes a beautiful girl, should I say?
A beautiful girl.
Right. Yeah. It's a wrong conversation. Anyway, so like it's like that. But one time a guy was walking in, he had on this like pretty sweet tracksuit, and I said something along those lines, like, "Oh man, that's a great outfit, bro. Like you're the best dressed person in this lot. Hey, come chat with me for a second." And he just came down and started chatting with me.
Wow.
And it was not like hokey or anything. It was just like it wasn't even really a huge joke. Now I may have said something like, "Bro, you look like you're, the long lost member of New Edition with that thing on. Like, you look so fresh, bro." I mean, like something like that. But we started talking. And then I got into the apologetics part from Jacob's course. Well, I guess you wouldn't call it apologetics, but just more
Sidewalk counseling class.
Sidewalk counseling. Yeah. So it's like, hey, who's in there? He shared it was his sister in there. Right. And all this other stuff. And so I'm like, hey, you're just an amazing older brother. I can tell, like, the fact that you're here with your sister today shows how much you care. And in his defense too, the sister was in a physically abusive relationship. Right now, I don't think that justifies. I mean, I don't want any child to or preborn child to die prematurely. Right. But I see as someone who's not maybe trained in just the science and the understanding of pro-life,
right,
how that's like, I'm doing this for her own good. Right. Yeah. And so we start talking. And so I went, through some of Jacob's dialogue tips. And I said, you're such a, now this is where Jacob in his course says something along the lines of like, you deserve all the information. I might try to take it even as, and it's such a beautiful way. In fact, I think that's one of the, if not the best tools to try to get someone to choose life when they're in an abortion minded frame of mind, but I took it, I take it a step further. If I can lace that with a compliment, like, look, you are such a smart, wise, and incredible person. And someone as smart as you deserves to have all the information. Can I show what's going to happen to your girlfriend, to your sister, to you, if you go through with this?
Yeah.
So it's just like, I try to like front load it with a compliment.
Yeah.
And then they're like, wow, he said all these nice things about me. And okay, sure. Most of the time I will get probably maybe 70%. They will let me show it to them. Yeah. And then I showed it to this gentleman and he said, whoa. And he stopped and he said, can I take that? And I said, yeah. He said, 1 second. And he goes to another car and I don't see him for a while. Like, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, if I'm guessing. I'm thinking, well, I guess that's that.
Yeah.
Then he walks to another, I think he walks to his car, to another car, and he looks at me and he gives me like the just a minute finger. Well, that was the car his mom was in. All of a sudden his sister comes walking out of the clinic crying and he runs up and embraces her. So I think they got on the text message thread or something got her out. Jacob actually showed up at once she got out. Jacob showed up, and actually Jacob showed up before she got out. Then she's walking down and Jacob was involved in the conversation with the family, and they ended up leaving the clinic that day. So, I mean, that's kind of an example of how it escalated, I think, into something beautiful.
So I want to ask you one more question about compliments before we go kind of move into other kinds of humor. Thinking back about your examples of like the guy with the purse, like that feels like such a safe joke to me, because like I know you're talking about like be nice, but it's like I feel like guys understand that is such typical, just kind of like guys needling each other a little bit. At the same time, you're kind of complimenting him because you're talking about him being fit or great looking. And so there's also some self-deprecating humor you're doing there, because you're also like, you're the best looking guy here. Like it's more you're joking on yourself and any other Sidewalk counselors that are there. And I feel like that's like the super safe territory where I can do that easily with guys, because I have a dad bod at this point. I look like I've got a second trimester. I do. I look like I've got a second trimester fetus when I look at myself in the mirror in the movie. It's not good, and I'm too lazy to exercise. It's a problem. But so it's really easy for me. Man. I'm going to be able to talk to most guys and be like, man, I wish I was in shape like you. I want to ask you kind of a touchy question, and we'll cut it if you want. But it seems like an area that's harder to thread the needle, especially these days, is when it's a guy complimenting a woman, complimenting her physical features. So could you talk a little bit about how you've been able to do that in a way where you're not worried, I imagine, that she's going to be like offended or feel like you're flirting with her or like something like that? Like, how have you done that with gals?
This is a great question. And I'll say, God, give us wisdom, because this is a touchy one. In Jesus' name, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I would say for me, two things. One, it helps to be in a group. Okay. So for instance, we had a woman leave the clinic recently, and I was saying some of these complimentary things to her, but like her sister was in the car. Another female sidewalk counselor was with us. And typically my rule of thumb is like, now, unless it's a life, like I just know this is the only choice. Typically, if I'm going to leave the clinic with someone, or like they come to a pregnancy resource center, ideally, unless I'm meeting them there, if we're going to be in the same car, if we're going to be eating together, like it's a woman, like there's got to be another woman typically with me. Do you know what I mean? Now, if there are exceptions to every rule.
Yes.
So, I mean, if it's life or death, like forget about it. I will throw the rule book out, and I will be completely appropriate. I don't want someone to get the wrong idea. So that helps, I think, in a group setting. The other thing too, though, is to really try to, well, one, to be for me, when I'm doing sidewalk counseling, to have a prayerful presence at first. So I will make it clear, like, this is not me showing up on the sidewalk with like open mic mode and without having a Mr. microphone and being like, I'm about to crush this crowd. I mean, like, we're out there. We are praying the majority of the time. We're not dialoguing with other people, going in and trying to do it in a loving, compassionate way. We're praying scripture and praying the rosary. I mean, I try to go to mass beforehand, typically, because I feel like it's a much less scary place when, I try to unite myself to the Lord before it. And that's another thing. It's just really the importance of being prayerful beforehand and during. Yeah. And I think that's the difference I see between people who might take the compassionate approach and the more, I would say, aggressive approach that can sort of, I've seen escalate into some pretty major confrontation out there, is the people who I think take the compassionate approach. I find that they're much more prayerful, versus even if people are kind of trying to throw condemning, like scriptures in a context that could be construed as condemning, or just, a lot for someone who's in that vulnerable of a place. I mean, if you're holding up a sign that says, unless you repent, you'll be thrown into the lake of fire, and someone has no biblical reference for any of that, I think that you may run the risk of making them run faster into the clinic, personally. Yes, that's my view. So I could be wrong. I mean, who knows what message someone needs to hear. But I think that the most important thing is to have your heart in the right place before going out there. Okay. So, I mean, I could talk about techniques and other things, but like, that's numero uno. Like, spend time with God beforehand and he'll open doors where walls once appeared, and spend time with him out there and he'll do this. I mean, yes, at any time I've seen someone choose life, there's always been prayer involved. And I am pretty sure we do a pro-life rosary a lot when we're out there. And I've just seen so many times that has been a catalyst for miracles happening. In fact, one time a woman came down with us and she said her sister was in there. And we said, well, you want to just pray the rosary with us? And I guess that was in her faith background. So she said, okay. Now the story was actually that her mom made her have an abortion. She regretted it. And now all of a sudden that mom is here with her 16-year-old younger sister. Awkward. And the woman who was forced to have the abortion, her older sister, was there. And she started talking to one of our sidewalk counselors, I guess had a pretty strong change of heart, and was like, she's texting her like crazy. I think she's texting her a picture of one of the miniature fetal models that we had, a picture of a cross, whatever. And trying to, so we said, well, you want to come pray this rosary with us? So we pray the first decade. I think it was the Joyful Mysteries, which is the birth of Jesus. It's when the angel Gabriel announces to Mary that she's pregnant. And right when we get to the end of that first decade, the sister comes sprinting out crying of the clinic. And it was just like whoa, I have never that. And we've seen those where we like finish some sort of prayer and a miracle happens, right? And she was 16 years old and she came out crying and she spoke with us, and she was, I mean, I was very confident she was in a good place. She was crying and she said, I couldn't, when apparently she opted to have the ultrasound before, moving on with the procedure or the pill or whatever she was planning on doing that day. Yeah. And when she apparently heard the heartbeat, she like lost her mind. Wow. Got hysterical inside there, and she left. And it was really, really cool. So we've seen those kinds of miracles. But to get back to your question, so I think having your heart in the right place. I mean, if God is not front and center in my communication with other people, then absolutely, like, it would be much easier for my pride, my vanity, for lust, for something that is not of the, Holy Spirit to muddy the conversation.
Sure.
But if I'm in that place, it changes everything. Now, regarding how to talk about it, I mean, I just think, I guess if I was going to think about it on the fly, it's like, what is something I would compliment my sister on?
Yeah.
And maybe keep it in that ballpark. Gosh,
Yeah.
you were so beautiful. You were just such a lovely, incredible spirit.
Yeah.
She has a car seat. How God must really think you're God must really love you to bless you with another child. I mean, you are just, she has a kid already. It's like, wow, what kind of amazing mom must you be that God blessed you with another? God, you were just so beautiful. You're so incredible. He's obviously showing off when he put this bundle of joy in your life. I know how,
this is so sweet.
So it's sweet, but it's not,
that's not flirty at all. Like that can't be construed as, flirty guys aren't like complimenting women for having like multiple kids or like that's not the move. So
absolutely. It's a great question you had though. Thank you. I mean, I think that's a huge question because as guys being out there, I'll be honest. I think it is okay in the right context and with the guidance of the Spirit, like to lay down some of those kinds of compliments. I mean, these are people that have probably felt extremely devalued, objectified, potentially abused in their relationships. Yeah. And you as a man speaking life and courage and strength and love into this woman, like, wow, that might just be exactly what someone needs from a male role model at that moment.
Absolutely. I love it. I've got all kinds of things that I could say about that, but I'm going to move us right along.
Sure.
So I think you've made a good argument for why we need to use humor and dialogue. You're kind of earning the right to be heard. You're getting them to stay longer. You're being different. Like this is the thing, and we've talked about this in different contexts too. Like be different than the pro-lifer they're expecting you to be, and you're more likely to keep them there. And so let's maybe transition a little bit into if there are people that are like they're sold, but they want to know how to do it. I would love to hear a little bit about like how do you help someone to be funny? Like I feel like the only reason I am ever funny, and I don't think I'm that funny, but the only reason I'm ever funny is because I feel like I almost study stand-up comedy at like a scientific level. I'm really trying to figure out how this is working, and I pick up certain things eventually, and I figure out ways to apply them, and then suddenly I'm saying things that are way funnier than I would have 5 or 10 years ago, right? Yeah. Like, so there's something like that, and I kind of like, is there a way that you can kind of help fast track people through that a little bit, and just like help people like, how do you bring some humor into these dialogues?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think, I guess I have a little bit of an advantage. I've been doing stand-up for over 12 years. Yeah. So I just have stuff I know that works or kind of timing or delivery or things that I know work. There's certain tricks with stand-up. I mean, there's kinds of examples of like the rule of 3 where you hit your punchline on the third beat, and there's certain tricks like callbacks where you reference something earlier.
That's what I do a lot. That's kind of my easy go-to is remembering callbacks and things I can reference.
And you can even call back certain things in situations. And I mean, I hope this isn't too edgy, but this is just kind of what happened in a dialogue one time. All right, so this was actually pretty interesting. I'm talking with this guy, and the clinic 2 weeks ago, I think, and we're talking, and he was pretty, it just seemed like it wasn't going anywhere. I mean, he was saying his sister was in there, and she's not answering her phone. It's kind of her choice, that's it. I'm going through the typical kind of protocols, trying to humanize the child. I'm trying to show him pictures of where the child is in development. I'm throwing some jokes out there. I'm just trying to be very nice, So eventually in the conversation, I just stopped. I was like, can we just say a prayer? So, okay. So we said in Our Father, and we keep going. And by the way, I will do that. I'll try. I mean, that's always I will try to pray if I can with them 100% of the time.
That so surprises me that works. That feels like that would be like too much for them if they're not religious. Like that's surprising. I mean, I hear you. I believe you that works, but I'm surprised.
Maybe I should probably give it a few minutes. I've heard people say, well, save it towards the end. And I think that makes perfect sense too. for me, a lot of times I'm just kind of praying for myself. I'm like, it's kind of like, well, if God isn't in this, I'm going to majorly nuke this entire conversation. So I will very frequently, if we're talking for just a minute, I'll say, this is a tough day. Would you mind if I just said a prayer for you really quick? Or if I just said a prayer? Yeah. And I mean, really, I'm just trying to like bring God front and center. And I believe the conversations typically go exponentially better if I do that. But so he said in Our Father, that didn't, he was, I could tell though, it was like he was starting to warm up and a little bit, but it still seemed like the writing was on the wall. Well, then he gets a phone call from this, I see his phone ring and it says on the like caller ID, sexy Twinkie Barbie or something like that. Oh, no. While we're in this very serious conversation. And so I stopped right there and said, look, bro, no matter how close we get, you never save me in your phone as sexy Twinkie Barbie.
That's so good.
and so he like started laughing. We're talking, but it still seemed like the writing was on the wall. It's nothing to be done. Yeah. So before he goes, and I had never done this before with somebody because this is more of a specific denominations, but I said, can I just say one more prayer? And I said a Hail Mary. And I'm literally like throwing up a Hail Mary at this point. And he leaves. And that was that. Well, I go back to my mom's house because I had to help her with something. Within an hour, I had missed a call from this gentleman because I gave him one of the flyers with our numbers on the back. Then I get a call from my other friend who's a sidewalk counselor. And she says, you need to meet us at Chick-fil-A like right now. Well, apparently that dude didn't get me, so he called the next person on the list, which was Mary, and he goes meets Mary at Chick-fil-A, and Mary hadn't even met him before, but goodness. And so he meets us at Chick-fil-A. She was already there with them, and he said, "Look, I wasn't totally honest with you. That wasn't my sister in there; it was my girlfriend, and I'm the father." And he said, "I just want to let you know, like, He basically, while we were there, he looked and he said, you saved my child's life." And he left that place and he said, come over here. He said, I also want to talk to you. Like, could we talk on the phone sometime? I also want to chat with you about something else. And I'm like, well, what's that? He said, well, I want to talk to you about proposing to her. And so this dude goes from about to end his child's life to, we said a Hail Mary within 1 hour. He's saved his kid's life. Wow. He's pulled his girlfriend out of that place. He's outside this restaurant with us, and he's, discussing proposing. So you talk about someone's life could have really taken two polar opposite tracks in that moment. Because we know, how many relationships does abortion destroy, right? The girlfriend holds the resentment. Yeah. The husband, it's not in our nature. So that you talked about a callback. That was kind of a callback, like paying attention to the moment. What do I see in this moment? That came up on the phone. Oh, wow, I can use that. If you don't know where to start, there's a few things. One, I think you're right. Listen to as many clean comics as you can, right? I'm going to advocate clean because there's a lot out there that could go in a different direction. But there are online comedy classes. I actually have an online comedy class. If you're interested, it's onlinecomedyclasses.com.
We'll link to that in the notes.
Yeah, if you're in Atlanta, I teach a local class, which is very beneficial because I think it has hand-on instruction. That's on funnyjosh.com. But listen to clean comics. And the other thing is, if you don't know how to be funny, just be nice and say, like, open with 2 compliments if you can. I don't know if there's a hard, fast, quantifiable number, but like, if you're thinking there needs to be a joke here, but you're not a jokester, or you feel a little dry in that area, just say nice things, right? Don't like go in necessarily hard selling like this whole life or death thing. And maybe the moment will call for it. Maybe the Holy Spirit will tell you we've got to open with something heavy. And Holy Spirit's the trump card. But even if it's just something, hey, how are you? Oh my gosh, you are so beautiful. I just want to let you know we're here because we care about people. We have real help and real resources. We can meet any need that somebody has and want to let them know they're not alone. That's
not bad right there.
There you go. You say that. If maybe this moment will call for something funny, but like, don't put the pressure on yourself to force it at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. Being genuine and nice and sincere. Like there's this woman who is so good at stopping people to talk. And she's taken Jacob's course, but part of the reason she's so good at it is because she's so inexperienced. And she's just like, so she's not in like salesman mode. She's just like, you know, just kind of a little shy and sweet. And so in that like reservation, it comes off as so much more genuine. So like God will use what you have, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, but I think like you said, if listening to stand-ups helped you, I think that's
hugely
good way
so
to
then
go.
if people want to take your advice, like who are your favorite clean comedians and why is it Brian Regan?
Brian Regan is great. I got to meet him one time. He's wonderful.
Oh,
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, he's really cool. Brian Regan is fantastic. Jim Gaffigan's fantastic. Tim Hawkins, very funny guy. Who else?
John Mulaney? Are you a John Mulaney fan?
He's brilliant. I like his clean stuff. I'll advocate for that.
He gets a little bit outside, but he feels pretty clean to me. I might regret this later if I'm forgetting something.
Yeah, well, anyway, but I will certainly say he's a brilliant writer. I mean, without a doubt.
Yeah.
So he's who else? Angela Johnson, very, very funny. Have a friend, Dustin Nickerson. I'm just kind of going off the top of my dome. But yeah, like there's a lot of really good. I mean, honestly, if you want great clean comedy, just go to Dry Bar Comedy. There's a lot.
Yes.
They are
just
huge.
Stumbled upon someone. I don't remember his name, but I stumbled on someone who's on the Dry Bar Comedy thing, and it was legitimately really funny. I was like, I've got to go watch the rest of this guy's set because that little clip was really funny.
Absolutely. They're consistently clean. And, I mean, just with my faith and I used to be extremely vulgar, and I feel like as my connection grew closer to God, that started to change, but also it's opened a whole lot more doors for me, to be honest. I mean, I've gotten so much more work because I can write and perform clean. So, watch at your own discretion. I will always advocate clean comics. So just know, that's, I can't vouch for anyone specifically, but those are a few of those I mentioned. Dry Bar, I think, was pretty bullseye though, and they've got some really talented people. A few friends of mine have had Dry Bar specials.
Nice.
Yeah.
Anything else that you could tell our listeners who are wanting to be able to just kind of bring humor into their dialogues? It's just any final tips?
Let me take a look. Let me think. You could have some icebreakers. There are things, though. I think if you do have, there are a few things, like in comedy, you have a routine. Now, we don't have a, quote, routine in pro-life dialogue in the sense that every word is scripted, because that would be inauthentic. Although you kind of do have a routine in the sense, like if someone brings up bodily rights arguments or whatever, the checkpoints you're going to get to.
Yes.
So similarly, I think that you can have certain checkpoints that you're obviously going to get to in a multitude of pro-life contexts. So for me, if I'm doing pro-life sidewalk outreach and we're talking to a woman, and we might bring up like baby showers or whatever, what I mean? Or we might bring up like, hey, do you know that we give people free baby showers? And let me tell you something, we hook people up, man. Like when they get these baby showers, they feel like they're on The Price is Right. So, I mean, like you can like have a few little things that you plan on sneaking in.
Right.
That, hopefully
prepared.
They're prepped. They could be funny, but even if they just are lighthearted and jovial and like flip the script, notice you don't always have to make somebody laugh to put them in a good mood.
Yes.
Right. If they just know you want to help them, that and that you care about them, like that's huge. That is enormous. So,
there was a point that I was about to make about the Price is Right thing. It's like that's not for me, like a laugh out loud joke. Like it's not, I don't feel like it's that funny, but it's like, I feel like, and I think we might've said this the last time we talked about humor and dialogue. It's like, it's the fact that it's either trying to be funny or you're trying to be lighthearted. Again, it's flipping the script so much. Like, I feel like that's the more important thing than like how objectively funny this like particular line is. It's the fact that you're using something that's lighthearted and fun, I think is most of the goal there.
Absolutely. And delivery is so clutch. I mean, you want to look lovingly confident, and smile. I mean, you would be surprised how radical, like what kind of different trajectory having a smile on your face can catapult a conversation into, right? Just looking like, and that's the thing I tell my stand-up students all the time. They go on stage and they'll have their routines, but they're not smiling. And all of a sudden they smile, and it's like a first date. I mean, you got to think about it in that context. If you're performing on stage for the first time, think about it like a first date. This audience probably not seen you before.
Yeah.
You know, this is their first impression of you. So if I showed up on a first date and I'm looking tense, morose, a little anxious, all of a sudden that is going to, I think, be a little bit infectious.
Yeah. It makes them feel that way too.
Exactly. Versus if I look lighthearted, bubbly, smiling, joyful, just turns down the temperature on the intensity of the situation a little bit, and kind of can infect them, hopefully, for that same kind of positivity. So even if it's just a little bit of a seed that is planted. So I think that is absolutely huge. Yeah, I think that's really, I mean, so just that would be like something I would say is smile and confidence, because if you act like it's life or death, then all of a sudden, they're probably going to be a little more anxious as well.
Yeah. I love that thing that you said about like kind of thinking about this ahead of time. Like, I feel like people could rehearse these checkpoints that often happen. Will happen in every conversation, but will happen sometimes, like on their own a bunch of times in the same way that I rehearse a talk. And then like another thing that came to my mind when you were talking about that was like I know sometimes the best lines I've used in talks didn't get pre-written like while I was rehearsing for a talk. Is something that happened during an actual performance of, the 50th time I gave a speech. So suddenly like something came to my mind in the moment and I said it and it worked. It's like, okay, write that stuff down. Like if you have a funny moment in a dialogue, even if you're self-counseling, like try afterwards, like make a note of that, because then you might be able to use that every other time that you talk about baby showers or whatever, those checkpoints in the future. So try not to kind of lose track of those things. Because as you kind of, I think, listen to comedy, you're going to start finding yourself, your instincts are going to get sharper, and you're going to come up with things even in the...
I think that's a great point. Absolutely. I mean, if you literally have a Rolodex of one-liners that have worked out there, you've seen put smiles on people's faces, even if they're not funny, but you say, when I say this, I consistently make somebody less anxious, more joyful, more receptive to the message. Please write that down. In fact, you're inspiring me. I need to do that. But yeah, that's a really, really great idea.
I love how you've basically transformed this from specifically like a humor in dialogue thing to like, it's more just like friendliness in dialogue, I think is kind of where you're coming from. It's like, yes, the comedian is saying like, yes, be funny when you can, but it's so much, it's more important just to be friendly and light. And if you can be funny too, that's great. But even if like, I feel like this is just going to be encouraging. If there's anyone that's overwhelmed, that's like, I just don't feel like I'm that funny. Like, it's okay, because if you're being friendly and light and sweet, and if they can tell that you want to help them, that's what's doing most of the work anyway. It's not the humor of the lines doing most of the heavy lifting. It's the friendliness.
And that's right. I mean, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. So you bring up a really great point, and I think you said this in one of your modules, is every conversation is what? Like
a series of difficult judgment calls amidst prayer without ceasing.
And that is the thing. I do think prayer needs to be at the heart of it. Because, I mean, if I get into self-will, I'm like, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to kill it. Like, that's the terrible. That is not going to work no matter how good what I say is. Because, you really want that spirit of compassion to radiate. And I believe, it says in the Bible what God is love. So if I plug into the source of love, that's the best shot I got. So I think, yes, praying internally, praying externally, if you can earn or get the privilege to pray with someone in these kind of dialogues, I think that's huge. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic point that you guys have in your apologetics series.
Thank you. All right. Where can people find you if they have just become a super fan during this podcast, but they haven't heard your stuff? I know some of I know some of it's on Spotify, but like, where can people go?
Yeah. So I'm on social media at Funny Josh Harris. Social media at Funny Josh Harris. I'm also on eHarmony at Funny Josh Harris. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you do that because do you constantly have to do not that Josh Harris in like Christian like circles because there's the courtship guy? Like I'm gonna tell you, we just filmed a couple of days ago a thing with Jacob for an online event that we're gonna be doing in November. That's gonna be like part training event, part fundraiser, and he shares a bit about kind of your story and your sidewalk counseling, and it's like we had to kind of figure out this so I've been working with this guy Josh Harris, not that Josh Harris, not the courtship guy, this other Josh Harris who's really funny, like that kind of thing. Do you have to do that a lot?
To be honest, I've gotten it quite a couple of times, but it's not been a huge thing. I mean, I do know I couldn't get joshharris.com because Josh, apparently he's the real Josh Harris. So
apparently he beat you to about 25 years.
Yeah, so I couldn't get joshharris.com. That's pretty sweet real estate. So I had to get funnyjosh.com, which actually might have worked out better.
That's pretty good, yeah.
You are definitely not the first person to bring up the pastor Josh Harris.
Yeah.
And then if they're interested, I have a website, funnyjosh.com, and I teach online classes. I have face-to-face classes as well, depending on where you're located. So you can get in touch with me through any one of those mediums. I got funny videos on there. I've got some testimonies on there. And I'll say one other thing that's really cool too is you never know, like you can get more creative with your gifts than you think. It can be more than just sidewalk ministry or apologetics, although I think those are like huge, like mission critical. Last October, we did a fundraiser for the Pregnancy Aid Clinic, which is our local pregnancy resource center. And we did a stand-up comedy show, a 2-night event called Laughs for Life. And we raised over $17,500 for them, right? And so that was pretty awesome, man. And so like, that's another cool thing is I feel like there's probably some people here who are listening to this podcast and they may have influence in areas that the pro-life, arena just hasn't penetrated yet. And so you never know what kind of influence your talents, your skills, your profession, your social sphere. I mean, these all are huge platforms in order to get the message out there. And I think, like you said, that is about praying without ceasing, but also discernment. But I just believe like that's one reason for me. Once I got off that ship, it was Lent. And one of my like Lent things, I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm just going to spend an hour in prayer in the evening because it was kind of an uncomfortable push and sacrifice for me. And that's when this whole sidewalk ministry was born. It came from that, right? And, it's like you give God 1 hour of your day, he'll give you 23 back. And so I would just say, like, if you lean into God, if you take care of God's business, he'll take care of yours. So I would just encourage people to, really, I guess, just be prayerful about things, just lean into the Lord and trust that he will lead you in the right direction and open opportunities for influence to help others realize that life is a gift.
Josh, I just appreciate you so much. I want to tell you a couple of things that I've just kind of noticed about you during this conversation that I love. And so I hope you're better at taking compliments than I am. I hope this can really actually be a blessing for you and you don't just like whatever and just kind of move on. Like just no, like you are a super humble person.
Oh,
and it is really cool. And again, like most humble people, like you're not like trying to say you're humble, but there's a lot of just things that you've said that just scream humility to me, which is so cool given that you are super funny. You're really good at what you do, but there's a humility to you. And you're also just so good at dialogue. You're like, I had this feel as you're telling these stories, this sense that I almost never get which is basically, I just so wish that all of our students, and by students, I just mean anyone like trying to learn from us, could do dialogue as well as you.
Oh, wow,
I had that sense when I was at St. Olaf. Like, I'm watching this amazing club. They're just rock stars and have so mastered the art of dialogue. Like, that day I was like, I could hire any one of these kids right now because they are as good at dialogue as all of my staff. Like, and that doesn't usually happen when we're at an Outbrace. And I get that exact same feeling listening to your story. So I just so appreciate what you're kind of allowing God to do through you. And man, if through this and a lot of other conversations, if the people that are listening to us could become just so much more like you when you're on a sidewalk or talking to someone, I just think that would be a really great thing. So I super appreciate you. You're a really awesome guy. And thanks for taking time with us this morning.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask you one question. And by the way, thank you for the humility compliment. I don't like to brag, but I am really humble. No, thank you. No, I really appreciate it. So here's where I would like to be kind of like, and I've gotten much better, but I would like to be just, an encyclopedia like a you or a Trent Horn. I love your course. I know I just need to keep burning it into my brain. What would you suggest to have for someone to be just a total stud from front to back with any kind of outside of the clinic apologetics type thing? I mean, I kind of have my talking points, but and I know, you guys and Trent are kind of along the lines of just like, hey, what are the unborn essentially? Like essentially what are the humanizing the child and the importance of like showing, obviously that has the same inherent value as us right now, but what has helped you kind of master these dialogues backwards and forwards?
I think a couple of things that come to mind, and that's a really sweet way of asking that question. I appreciate that. I think one of them is reps. And I think that's true in comedy too. Like most comedians are not great in their first few years, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like a lot of hard work to get to the point where, they get where you're usually like hearing their albums and stuff. And I feel like that's the same with dialogue. Like I sucked. I was so bad at dialogue in the beginning.
Really?
Oh yeah. Well, not only did I suck in the sense that I didn't have the best arguments and I couldn't have known the best arguments because I feel like, a lot of the most persuasive stuff, like we've kind of like developed through the conversations, right? And then a lot of talking after. But also I had a terrible attitude. I was one of those jerk apologists that thought I was smarter than everyone. And it's all about how pro-life is so smart and pro-choice is so dumb. Like I had a horrible attitude in my first years as an apologist. You wouldn't have liked me back then, I hope.
Wow.
Because I was so different. In fact, there's a story. I don't know how often we've told this publicly. I know Jacob's talked about this a lot, and I've kind of given away, like the punchline here. But like Jacob became pro-life at a series of talks that I gave at a tiny church that he used to go to, that his wife dragged him to. He didn't want to go. He was a pro-choice guy, and she made him go to this thing that he wanted to go to. And it was me, and he became pro-life at that, but he also inherited this kind of jerky attitude that was present in between the lines of what I was saying. I never said something like, we're so much smarter than them, but he certainly inherited this bad attitude.
Wow.
And then he got super passionate about pro-life and starts talking to his friends about it. And his conversations went so badly, he literally lost friends. And I think I'm partly responsible for that because he inherited this kind of jerk apologist, arrogance that I had back. This is probably like 15-ish years ago or something. And so Jacob and I both went through kind of a similar period of time where we had to be humbled. And I think God had a lot to do with that. I think Steve Wagner had a lot to do with that with both of us also. Like I think Steve kind of teamed up with Jesus and gave me some humility and helped me understand I am not as smart as I think I am. And there's a lot of other other things outside of that. And so anyway, we've had a lot of, there's a lot of that. So I think reps, and I think something for me that I think has so helped me in the dialogues, like when I think about part of what was my problem 15 years ago was I didn't have empathy for pro-choice people. Wow. I don't think I ever had empathy for pro-choice people until I became friends with them. Right. And so and I talk about this in a relational apologetics talk that I think we've put out now, or no, there's a YouTube video of me giving a talk on this, but the short version is, I have spent a year in this Facebook debate group with several pro-choice people and like one other pro-life guy was like the core of us. And that was the first time I'd ever spent more than an hour or two with a pro-choice person. And for the first time, I began humanizing pro-choice people. I realized after that year how I was only good at humanizing the unborn. I was not good at humanizing the flesh and blood image bearer that was in front of me. And then I became friends with Deanna, who is now named Andrew. But like that friendship began at that point as I'm realizing you're only going to change certain people's minds over a long period of time and not in just one conversation. And just like there's no way to be friends with these people and get into their lives. I mean, I guess there is a possible way to do that without empathizing with them, but it's not going to be a good, healthy friendship. But like for me, it forced me to get into their shoes and understand they are so much more than a pro-choice avatar. There's like, they've got these backgrounds and these beliefs and these desires. And like, there's so many more dimensions to them. And I think that helps me now when I talk to pro-choice people. I am so less judgy than I used to be. Like I just see them as like, I could be them. Some of their arguments make more sense than some of the things that pro-life people say sometimes. Like if you grow up, with, these parents, with these beliefs and in that church or lack thereof, and those kids at school, and then this college with these professors that are trying to, indoctrinate you in all these different ways. Like, of course you believe these things. It totally makes sense. Let's try to work together as a team toward more truth. And so I think that's probably one of the, it's not the arguments. Like everyone needs to know the equal rights argument. If you don't know the equal rights argument, my goodness, what are you doing? But it's so much more than that. I think it's reps and I think it's empathy.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, man. I just appreciate you. I just think you're awesome.
I appreciate you, man.
Thank you for blessing us. Thank you for your time. And I really think our people are going to enjoy it. I've mentioned to a few people, like as they ask about like what podcasts are coming up, I'm bringing on a comedian and they're like, what? Like, that's awesome. Like they've been so excited for this. So thanks. I'm super excited for you,
brother. Well, keep me posted on the launch date of this bad boy. I'll definitely share it.
Definitely. Talk to you later. God bless.
God bless you, man. See you, buddy.
Thank you for listening to the Equipped for Life podcast, a project of Equal Rights Institute. Equal Rights Institute uses speaking, writing, YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, and campus outreach to help pro-life advocates in the areas of practical dialogue tips, relational apologetics, pro-life philosophy, and sidewalk counseling. If you've been helped by this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a donation at equalrightsinstitute.com.